Hey guys, Jeremy here, Simple of Life, and I apologize, this Tool Time Tuesday is incredibly rushed. I am in the middle of all kinds of knives I've got on the go right now, and I need to clean up a little bit, and then we're going to take a look at this week's tool, which is going to be really simple again, keep it really basic, squares, and sliding measuring tools squares. First though, let's get to some viewer knives. Now, the first knife we're going to take a look at is Carlos. Now, this is Carlos' second knife. He is from Brazil, and he sent this to me, and I really like the mosaic pins. He's got a really great polish finish on this blade, and also the brass liner in there. That's really classy. Excellent looking blade. Well done, Carlos. Thanks for sending that in. The next knife, Ned. Ned is from Australia, and here are some knives that he has made. I believe this very first one here is his first knife he's made, and others are just the progression of his knife making collection, and as he's getting more into it. Also, check out that mini karambit. That's a really neat little design. I think a lot of people watching this will kind of find that a pretty cool little project to maybe try and take on something similar to that. Really cool design there. And then also this Tanto, really cool knife. Thanks for sharing those, Ned. Look great. And third, Noah. Noah's an 18-year-old from Milton, I believe. I don't know where Milton is. Sounds like it would be a Dakota place, one of the Dakotas. Anyways, has made these two knives. He sent me these pictures of these knives, and I really like these carbon fiber scales on this first one. Really classy. I know that carbon fiber can be very, you need to be careful when you're working with it, as with all dust in your shop, but especially carbon fiber is supposed to be really, really bad for you, and also it's just filthy. So nice work on that one. And then also this blue handled knife. Really cool looking blade. I really like that blue, just kind of pops there. And great looking knives, Noah. Keep up the great work. And thanks to all you, keep sending your knives in. I've got a list like this long of knives that need to be featured. So if you haven't seen yours yet, it's just because it was sent in after these ones. I'm just sending them out in order. So I need to clean up my shop a little bit, and then we will get to Tool Time Tuesday. Just check out this mess. Look at this, is horrible. I'm embarrassed about this. Like, everywhere you look, there's mess. All kinds of stuff. Did a whole bunch of heat treating today. All these blades. A little prototype neck knife. I actually like this one better, a little thinner. This one is in 154 cm. And just all kinds of knives and mess, and oh man, this is bad. Okay, let's clean it up. It is insane how much sandpaper you go through when you're making knives. That did it. Alright, so here I've just got a random collection of various squares. We're going to take a quick look at them, and I'll tell you that when you're getting into setting up a toolkit for building anything, squares should be on your top of the priority. Really can't build much very well without making sure it's square. I don't measure a lot of the stuff when I'm building. I just don't. I mean, obviously some things I do, but a lot of times if I'm not working from drawings, I just eyeball it and mark it, but I still check it for square because that is important. So let's just take a look at the different types of squares and some things to consider. Okay, let's start off with some of the least useful ones for knife making. This is your metal square. Good for framing, woodworking, building things, cutting large pieces. Really not that practical for knife making. So really, I don't use this much at all for knife making, but I thought I'd show it anyways. Great for straight edges, and if you're building stuff for your shop and stuff like that, you can use a straight edge to measure, and obviously for checking for square. Alright, now this is the classic framer's square. Again, not overly suited for knife making, but you can use this in a pinch for marking steel and stuff like that. Now these things are actually an incredibly, not complicated, but sort of, tool. There's so many different options. I actually have a book, it's a vintage book written by Stanley. It's about this thick, and it's all the different ways that you can use these carpenter squares. You see there's different angles on here. There's certain ways that you can use these. I don't know of those for, you know, figuring out your how to make a set of stair stringers for getting the stairs, the rise and the run proper and stuff like that. Very, very underutilized tool. Most people do not understand how to use these properly. I don't, but I do know that these things are incredibly capable, and really for the price, this one is just plastic, which I probably wouldn't recommend. You can get aluminum or metal ones, steel, and for the price, really, really handy. Use this all the time when I'm building stuff, mostly cutting 2x4s and stuff like that, but really handy square to have. Okay, now we got these sliding squares. Kind of getting into more useful for knife making. This one is a 16-inch, it's a Stanley? Yeah. Now these are pretty good. They're fairly reasonably priced, and for the most part they're quite accurate. Really, really great for doing layout on steel for knives, getting your edges square when you're cutting them and stuff like that. And this is 16-inch, but the one that I actually use more is this little 7-inch one. A little bit shorter. Obviously, when you're working with knives, the material you're using is not that big, and so this one, I love this square. I've had this square probably, I would say, 15 years, and this is like my go-to. Most of these squares come with a little scribe in the bottom. Very often this will fall out. Pull it out there, and you can actually use this to mark the line. It's good if you're in a pinch and you don't have another scribe, but just keep in mind they do tend to fall out quite often. This one's gone, and but really you can very quickly with this square, you can measure, mark straight lines, mark 45-degree angles, and 90-degree angles. Super handy squares. And again, similar to these are these, you can buy these combination sets, and you can actually spend a lot of money on these. Now, I have a Starrett set in my other toolbox, and that set I think will run you around $200. These usually come in 3 parts. The first part we'll look at is this protractor type. So this has all your angles here, and this is actually very, very handy for knife making. It depends on the type of knife you're doing, and once you kind of get into different processes, sometimes you want to mark very critical lines. If you're doing, tantos where you've got a separate bevel at the tip of the blade, this is actually quite useful for marking that out, although it's still kind of on the big side. And again, when you get these squares, usually they'll come in a set with these 3 all on one ruler. This here is called the center finder, and I'll kind of show you how that works quick. I don't use these much, so I don't even know if I've got all the right screws and stuff in here, but the way these squares work is they've got like a little groove on the one side, and then there's a little bolt here with a little notch on there, and that's what grabs it and pulls it tight into the frame, in theory pulling it square. So you slide it in there like that, tighten it down. Now what a center finder is for is finding the center of something round. Obviously if you're working with a square stock, it's quite easy to mark center. But to use these and find the center of a round piece of material, all you'll do is you'll set this in here like that, and in theory that line should be right in the center of this piece of doweling in this case. So really quite useful. You can actually use these for a lot of different things, and this is actually a fairly common one that I use quite a bit for building stuff around the shop. And then obviously usually the third part to this little kit is this part here, just like what these ones come with. Now I've lost a little bolt for this one. I really don't use this much. It's not a really good quality set, but that's the way that these typically will come, 3-piece set like that. And like I said, you can spend a lot of money on these. You can pick them up for 20-30 bucks for the lower end ones, which for most stuff they'll work fairly well. And probably the most common ones that I find for knife making are these small machinist squares. A lot of people ask what type of square that is. That's called a machinist square. There's no adjustability. Most of them do not have any measuring increments. It is strictly for checking 90 degrees. And these are really, really handy. Now these ones are not very high quality ones. I don't know, they're not unbranded. You can get like Starrett brand and some of the higher ends, but even these ones are really, really accurate, within a few thousandths of an inch, which is plenty more than I need when I'm laying things out by hand. One thing I use these an awful lot for is when I've got my piece of steel and I trace out whatever knife I'm going to be cutting out, what I like to do is I like to take my square and I'll come right up to the edge of the knife and I'll scribe a line, and then I'll cut that first. That way when I'm in the bandsaw and working, I'm not working with a large piece of stock. Also, when I put this stock back on the shelf, it's already at 90 degrees to one end. Really makes it handy, keeps your metal rack nice and clean and tidy, and you've always got a nice square piece of steel to go grab. Another thing these machinist squares are really good for is checking the squareness and the level of your drill table. A lot of people don't do this enough. I'm guilty of it myself, but it's a good idea every now and then just to double check. Bring this up there. If you've got a nice clean surface here and it's flat, you can tell that your drill press is going to be perfectly square to your table, and adjust it as necessary. Really important, especially when you're drilling holes for your pins. If you get those holes perfectly 90 degrees, everything slides together better. It's not going to start skewing the different sides of the scales, and really important when you're putting a knife together that everything is drilled nice and square. Makes a big difference. Another common use that I always use my machinist squares for is checking 90 degrees to my platen. Sometimes you need to adjust your platen to, for shaping different scales or for different processes. So whenever I'm bringing it back, I always grab out my machinist square, tighten up my work rest, and make sure that my platen is exactly 90 degrees. And if you set it up so that there's no light coming from the other side of that, that is pretty much as close as you're going to get it. And it just ensures really nice, hard 90-degree edges when you're profiling your blades. Really important to do this, and the machinist square, super tool for that. Alright guys, there's a really quick look at a very basic tool, the square. If you're considering knife making and you really want to get into it, I recommend you check out these small machinist squares. Inexpensive, super handy to have, and these two live on my workbench. I don't put them away, they're always out, and I'm constantly reaching for them and using them several times every day. Super handy tools to have. I hope you enjoyed this week's Tool Time Tuesday. I've got a boatload of work to get back to. Thanks for watching guys. Cheers.